introduce Gordona Howell and her presentation today on Beyond Pets, the research that she's been working on for a year now. I first got to meet Gordona a couple years ago when she was a freshman, had her in class, and it's been an amazing journey to see her just grow and mature and really come into the future educator she is today. So I've really enjoyed this last year of working with your research. I'm so glad you could find something that I know Gordona is very passionate about and has always loved animals. And even from the freshman year, I remember you talking about animals, and so it's neat that you're able to find something that combines kind of your two big loves with your animals and teaching. So, of course, to symbolize your hard work and
All right, guys, thank you all for being here. I want to start off this morning with a quote. So, pets are humanizing. They remind us we have an obligation and responsibility to preserve, nurture, and care for all life. These powerful words from actor and activist James Cromwell capture something we all instinctively feel. That animals aren't just the creatures we live with, they're family, they're companions, and they're teachers. We often think of pets just as that, pets, furry friends that make us smile. But the truth is, they have a profound impact on who we are and how we grow, especially for children. The relationship with an animal can be transformative. It's not just about having a dog to walk or a cat to cuddle. These bonds can teach kids how to trust, how to connect, and how to regulate emotions and show empathy. And when human relationships fall short, pets can even step in to fill the emotional gaps. Today, I want to take you on a journey through the research, theory, and real-life experiences to understand why and how these bonds matter. We'll start with the psychological foundation of the attachment theory, move through the science of how our brains are wired to connect, and finally explore how animals help children build emotional strength. So let's start with the foundation of the attachment theory. Developed by John Mobley and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, this theory explains how our early relationships, especially with our primary caregivers, form the blueprint for how we connect with others for the rest of our lives. There are 4 major attachment styles. Secure attachment happens when caregivers are emotionally available and consistent. Children in these environments feel safe to explore the world, and they learn that others can be trusted. Ambivalent attachment arises when caregivers are inconsistent, sometimes nurturing, but sometimes not. These children often grow up unsure, anxious, and preoccupied with closeness. Avoidant attachment develops in response to emotional distance. These kids learn to be self-reliant, often suppressing emotions and avoiding intimacy. Then there's disorganized attachment, which results from chaotic or even frightening caregiving. These children may struggle with both fear and longing for connection and often lack strategies for emotional regulation. Now you might be thinking, but what does any of this have to do with animals? Well, as it turns out, attachment styles influence how we bond not just with people, but with pets. And in some cases, the pet becomes the primary attachment figure, especially for kids lacking stability elsewhere. Bowlby also introduced something called internal working models. Think of these as mental blueprints that tell us who we can trust, how worthy we are of love, and what we should expect from relationships. These models are built early and often subconsciously. They guide how we interact with the world. A child who is soothed when crying, who is heard when expressing fear, builds a model that says I matter and people will show up for me. But a child who is ignored or treated unpredictably may build a model that says I have to deal with these things alone. The beauty of internal working models is that they are adaptable. New experiences can reshape them. Positive relationships, even with pets, can teach someone who once felt unlovable that they are in fact deeply worthy of a connection. Think about just that for a moment. A child who's been neglected and doesn't trust adults might find healing through the steady love of a dog. A teen dealing with trauma might rebuild their sense of safety through caring for a cat. So how do animals become the attachment figure? Research shows that many people rely on pets in ways that mirror human relationship. Pets can be secure bases, giving us the confidence to explore the world, knowing that they're waiting for us when we return. Safe havens, a place of comfort when life gets overwhelming. Curtis research revealed that people often turn to pets just for comfort turn to pets for comfort just as often and sometimes more than they turn to friends or partners. Kong and Bartholomew found that people with assistant dogs didn't just experience physical help. They experienced emotional security like they would in a close, trusted relationship. What's amazing is that much of this operates subconsciously. Psychologist Mario Mikluencer discovered that just being near a beloved pet can reduce cortisol, our stress hormone, and increase oxytocin, our bonding hormone, and even elevate our self-esteem. We may not realize it, but our bodies do. Our pets become part of our emotional support system right alongside the people we love. These effects are especially powerful in children. Kids are still forming their internal working models. Their brains are highly neuroplastic, which means that they're open to change. So the bonds they form with animals can have lasting effects on their emotional health. Take, for example, children from homes where emotional consistency is lacking. Maybe there's a messy divorce, illness, or instability. For these kids, a pet can become their most reliable source of love. And the bond isn't just emotional, it's also biochemical. Interactions with the pets trigger oxytocin release, the same hormone involved in bonding between mothers and infants. That means that these relationships are literally hardwired into our brains. But it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. The strength of a child's bond with a pet depends on the child's level of involvement in the pet's care. The animal's responsiveness. Does the dog come when called? Does the cat purr when cuddles? Just like human relationship, pet bonds require time, connection, and mutual care. So let's talk a little bit about emotional regulation. Imagine a child who comes home after a stressful day at school. Maybe they got into an argument with a friend, or maybe they're feeling anxious about their test. Their emotional systems are on high alert. But then they sit on their couch, begin petting their dog. The rhythmic movement, the physical closeness, the gentle response from the animal, all of these elements signal safety to our brain. Their heart rate slows, their breathing deepens, their cortisol levels drop. That's not just comfort, that's a neurochemical regulation. And over time, kids will learn, when I feel overwhelmed, I can calm myself. I have ways to cope. My feelings are manageable. And that's a huge building block of emotional resilience. Let's talk a little bit about empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel what someone else is feeling, and it's not something we're born knowing. It's learned often through modeling. Animals are amazing empathy teachers. They don't speak, but they're communicating constantly. A dog whines, a cat hides, a rabbit thumps its foot. Kids learn to pay attention. They learn to adjust their tone, their movements, and their behavior. In doing this, children become more attuned, not just to animals, but to people. For example, a child who notices that their dog retreats when voices get loud might begin to recognize when a sibling is overwhelmed or when their classmates need space. Through caring for a pet, kids practice putting another's needs before their own. That's the root of compassion. That's the foundation for strong, healthy relationships later in life. Beyond empathy, animals provide something more foundational, emotional safety. For many children, especially those dealing with bullying, grief, or trauma, pets become a lifeline. A guinea pig never criticizes, a dog never judges, and a cat never tells you, get over it. That constant, unconditional presence can help a child feel secure even when the world feels unpredictable. Psychologists call this the secure attachment, a bond that allows for exploration, vulnerability, and emotional growth. The presence of a securely bonded pet can actually reduce the emotional impact of trauma and provide a stable platform for healing. Animals also help kids build their nonverbal communication skills. Because animals don't use words, kids must learn to read the subtle cues. A swishing tail, flattened ears, excited barks, excited purring. This sharpens children's observational skills and makes them more sensitive to emotional shifts in others. They begin to notice when someone's shoulders slump, when a friend is quieter than usual, when someone needs support even when they're not asking for it. This is a social intelligence, and it's a skill that will serve them in school, friendships, and adulthood. My research began with gathering existing data and reviewing previously published studies, but I wanted to see how these ideas played out in real life. I wanted to understand how do these bonds between children and animals show up beyond the research. So after completing my literature review, which uncovered strong connections between pet bonds, emotional regulation, and empathy development, I decided to use a qualitative research design, specifically the case study approach. Rather than trying to fit the data into pre-existing categories, I took an inductive approach to coding. That just means that I allowed patterns, themes, and insights to emerge naturally from the stories and experiences I collected, instead of forcing them into a preset framework. When I began this case study, my original plan was to interview between 3 to 5 participants. Unfortunately, I was only able to secure one participant. But this one participant offered incredible insight. She was involved in a nonprofit animal therapy organization for the past 3 years, and the stories she shared were powerful and deeply aligned with my research findings. One theme that emerged and that beautifully tied back to my literature review was the way animals help reduce stress and promote empathy in children. The participant spoke passionately about her experiences. One story that stood out was about a kindergarten classroom. She described how children immediately understood the importance of using their inside voices, not just because the teacher told them to, but because they didn't want to scare the dog. Now, if you've ever been in a kindergarten room, you know how hard it is to get everyone to use their inside voices at the same time. But here, the presence of the dog was the motivator. The participant explained it like this. The dog becomes a tool to help children behave and use good manners. She also shared simple lessons like don't poke the dog in the eye, help children connect actions and empathy. They realized that if the dog doesn't like that, maybe their friends won't either. That's a profound realization to have as a child. Another story she shared was about her work with students in a residential center ranging ages 12 to 17. She said that when these students are with the dogs, they're not thinking about their trauma or their struggles, they're just being kids. In fact, she noticed during these moments that the students not only interact more with the animals, but they also are interacting with their friends and themselves. And one especially touching story was about a young girl who had suffered a spinal injury from a trampoline accident. She was in the hospital, and when the therapy dog entered the room, he immediately crawled onto her bed. The participant described how in that moment, the girl's blood pressure and heart rate stabilized, something that brought comfort not only to the child, but also to her parents watching from her bedside. A quote from the participant repeated often was this: "The act of petting an animal can make anyone feel better in just a moment." She also talked about how teachers, often working with nonverbal students who use devices to communicate, but in their first reaction with the dog, some of those students might say words like doggy or start petting the animal and engaging in ways they hadn't before, sometimes reading books to the dog or holding short little conversations with them. And again, those were students who weren't communicating without their device, but they were willing to open up when that dog was in their room. So while I may have only had one participant, the depth and the richness of her stories truly brought my research to life. The themes of stress reduction, empathy development, communication, and connection were evident throughout. And all through the simple, beautiful presence of an animal. All of this is why animal-assisted therapy is growing rapidly in schools and therapeutic settings. In these programs, children engage in structured activities, like with animals, grooming, walking, feeding, playing. These tasks help children build confidence, develop responsibility, and process difficult emotions in a non-threatening way. It's especially effective for children with trauma, anxiety, or developmental challenges. The animal becomes a bridge, a safe intermediary between the child and the therapist, or between the child and the world. So what is all of this telling us? It tells us animals aren't just pets. They're emotional anchors, teachers, healers. They help children build resilience, empathy, emotional regulation, and social intelligence. And in a world where so many children face emotional challenges, that kind of support can be life-changing. They remind us that love doesn't always require words. That connection can come from a paw, a purr, or a wagging tail. So the next time you see a child snuggling a dog or whispering secrets to their cat, know this: something powerful is happening. They're not just playing, they're learning, they're healing, they're growing. Thank you for being here, guys. Do you have any questions? Dr. Buckman.
Thank you for your research. In your research, did you come across any studies that have been conducted working with students who have witnessed mass school shootings? And is there anything out there that is showing, if you bring pets and animals into the classroom, where these horrific things have been potentially witnessed, or at least students coming back into the school?
Not specifically in my literature review, but actually my participant kind of shared a story similar to that. They had I can't remember, I think she said it was a teacher who had his personal firearm on him and it discharged, but no one was hurt. Like, but the kids were really shook up and like scared in that environment, and so they had animals in there the next few weeks working to calm it down and make that school a comforting environment again. But I think that was the only like I came across. I'm sure it's out there though.
You focused a lot on cats and dogs. Any other types of animals that you ran across in your research or you discussed?
Like guinea pigs, rabbits, anything, I want to say anything that you can pet. I know equine therapy is huge right now. The reason I focused on cats and dogs is just because as a future educator, like I want to know what's going to be best for my students, and it's not as easy just to be like, let me take my horse to school.
Branching off of that question, if your school said, yes, you can have a pet in your classroom, what would be your ideal pet and why?
I want to say my dog, because A, I love her. B, you know, like guinea pigs and ferrets and like all those smaller animals smell and they tend to be more maintenance versus like, you know, like the dogs there, there's a lot of programs like reading to the dogs, like they listen. But if it had to be a smaller animal, I almost would say like a guinea pig or a hamster, because then they can like, you know, still interact with the students, like put them in the ball and let them go around the room. But definitely something more hands-on than like a fish.
Did you see any research regarding autism in anything you saw?
Not specifically, no. Yes.
So how does this process of you doing this research, how do you think it's going to impact you in your future practice as an educator?
For sure. I definitely want to have that option for my students, even if it's not provided, like by school counseling or anything. Like, if I can get approved to have some sort of animal, like I said, ideally my dog, in my classroom, I feel like it'll create a safe space for my students, especially like at the beginning of the year when they're getting to know me. I feel like an animal is much more easier just to like, you know, like kids are attracted to a dog versus a stranger. So like it will help like be the bridge to meeting me and building my relationship with my students, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have pets?
I do. I grew up on a family farm, so I have every animal under the sun. Yes. In college, I've just had my one dog though, and she's definitely got me through.
Thank you, Gordona.
Thank you guys.